In 1942, behind barbed wire, in a remote POW camp somewhere in Europe, prisoners stared at the bleak walls surrounding them. Guards patrolled relentlessly. Every corner held danger, every shadow a threat. But despite the fear, determination burned brighter. These men refused to let captivity break them, not entirely. They found ways to fight back in secret. One of the most daring methods, sending messages the enemy could never detect, that it began with small gestures. A letter that looked ordinary, folded in a certain way. A joke whispered at the wrong time, carrying a hidden meaning. Prisoners watched one another, memorizing patterns, gestures, and hints. They began sending messages that no guard could detect. Each code was a lifeline, a bridge to the outside, and a spark of hope in a place designed to crush it. The risk was immense. A single mistake could mean solitary confinement, beatings, or worse. And yet the prisoners pressed on. They realized that survival depended not just on strength, but on brains, cunning, and patience. In their hands, even a seemingly mundane letter became a silent strike against the captors. Invisible ink became a tool of defiance. Coffee, plant juice, even lemon or urine, anything that could vanish from sight once dry, was used to write messages. Laundry lines, dishes, and objects around the camp were transformed into signals. Each symbol, each arrangement, carried meaning for those who knew the system. For everyone else, it was simply part of daily life. POWs taught one another these codes in secret. Songs, poems, jokes, even games of chess became vehicles of communication. Lessons were memorized and passed quietly to newcomers. Every successful transmission became a small triumph, a reminder that the human spirit could strike back even in the darkest circumstances, and strike back they did. Messages reached Allied forces with intelligence that often proved vital: troop movements, supply shortages, and even plans for escape. Prisoners were not just surviving, they were participating in the war itself. And every hidden success gave them courage and purpose in a world designed to break both. Guards began to suspect something. Interrogations followed. Prisoners endured questioning, threats, and intimidation. But each attempt to uncover the codes only made them more inventive. The messages evolved, becoming subtler, more intricate, almost invisible. The prisoners were learning faster than their captors, and every move forced the enemy to adapt. Psychologically, the effect was profound. Prisoners realized that while their bodies were confined, their minds could remain free. Each code transmitted was a victory, a small reclamation of autonomy. Hope became contagious, spreading through the barracks, inspiring the men to risk more, to create more, to resist more. The networks grew. What started as individual acts became organized. Entire barracks participated in the hidden communication system. Letters, gestures, and seemingly mundane actions became part of a larger, invisible army within the camp. Every successful message, every clever trick, became proof that confinement could never fully control ingenuity. Some operations were daring. A coded letter might indicate the timing of a transfer, allowing prisoners to position themselves for an escape or to pass information undetected. Simple objects, a cup, a piece of clothing, a small scratch, transformed into tools of resistance. It was a war fought in silence, unseen but potent. Morale skyrocketed. Men who had felt helpless discovered the power of ingenuity. The camp was no longer just a prison. It became a battleground of intellect. Observant, clever prisoners could outwit guards, evade detection, and maintain contact with the outside world. Even small successes gave meaning to lives otherwise trapped in despair. By 1943, POW codes had become critical to the Allied effort. Intelligence collected through these messages helped plan rescues, informed battlefield strategies, and saved lives. Men who had been expected to simply endure captivity were now active participants in the war effort. Even when guards increased scrutiny, the prisoners adapted. Codes became invisible in plain sight. Arrangements of laundry, notes tucked into books, even subtle facial expressions carried vital instructions. Every signal mattered. Every small act could tip the balance in a covert struggle against captivity. The psychological resilience of POWs became remarkable. Despite hunger, fear, and exhaustion, they innovated constantly. Every new method of secret communication was a declaration: we will not be defeated. We remain free in thought and action. The impact extended beyond the camps. Messages relayed critical intelligence, troop positions, supply lines, and even enemy weaknesses. Some information directly influenced the planning of operations thousands of miles away. The invisible work of prisoners had real consequences on the battlefield. Men collaborated quietly, teaching, testing, and refining the codes. They shared successes, warned of failures, and celebrated ingenuity. In a place designed to enforce obedience, creativity flourished. Laughter, whispered jokes, and subtle gestures became tools of defiance and camaraderie. The lesson was clear: intelligence and courage could outmatch brute force. Guards had weapons and authority, but the prisoners had resourcefulness and willpower. Each coded success reinforced morale, strengthened unity, and proved that the human spirit could never be fully contained. By late 1943, POWs had mastered secret communication to a level that confounded their captors. Entire networks operated under the noses of guards. Ordinary objects became carriers of extraordinary information, each message a testament to cleverness, courage, and the unbreakable human will. Even in the face of extreme danger, prisoners persisted. Punishment was a real threat, yet they continued to innovate, sending intelligence that often shaped events far beyond the camp. They had transformed captivity into a battlefield of minds, a war fought silently but effectively. These hidden networks were more than survival tools. They represented hope, resilience, and defiance. Every message, every gesture, and every code reminded the prisoners that they still had control over at least one thing: their intellect. By the end of this period, POWs had not just survived. They had resisted, they had fought, they had influenced the war. Barbed wire could contain bodies, but it could not contain ingenuity, courage, or the desire to act. In darkness, in fear, in isolation, prisoners proved that freedom of the mind could never be imprisoned. Their hidden codes, their clever communication, and their relentless determination became a silent weapon, shaping outcomes far beyond the camp. By early 1944, POW networks had become an invisible web across camps in Europe and Asia. The system had grown from a handful of men to hundreds, each carrying knowledge, codes, and messages. What had begun as survival now became resistance. They were no longer simply prisoners. They were unseen operators in the war. Messages moved through letters, scraps of paper, and coded objects. Each communication carried intelligence: ship movements, troop locations, supply shortages. Sometimes, a single line of a seemingly innocent letter could change the course of a local battle or alert forces to an impending attack. The creativity was staggering. One prisoner wrote poems that, when read line by line, revealed coordinates. Another used musical notation to encode messages, while others used chess moves to convey instructions. Every method was tested, refined, and passed on, often with humorous code names that concealed deadly seriousness. Guards grew increasingly suspicious, but even under heavy surveillance, the prisoners adapted. New systems were introduced faster than the guards could detect. Every increased risk only sparked more ingenuity. Prisoners learned to read body language, facial expressions, and subtle signs to continue communication without writing a single word. In one camp, a seemingly ordinary game of dominoes became a complex cipher. Each piece represented a letter, a number, or an instruction. Guards watched, unaware that intelligence was flowing across Europe with every placement of a tile. The prisoners laughed quietly among themselves, sharing in the thrill of subverting the system. Even when guards increased scrutiny, the prisoners adapted. Codes became invisible in plain sight. Arrangements of laundry, notes tucked into books, even subtle facial expressions carried vital instructions. Every signal mattered. Every small act could tip the balance in a covert struggle against captivity. The psychological resilience of POWs became remarkable. Despite hunger, fear, and exhaustion, they innovated constantly. Every new method of secret communication was a declaration: we will not be defeated. We remain free in thought and action. One famous incident involved a message smuggled through a Red Cross inspection. It detailed enemy positions and alerted Allied forces to a planned movement. The intelligence led to a successful ambush, saving lives and demonstrating the profound impact these invisible networks could have. Not all POWs were soldiers. Civilians, doctors, and even musicians became part of the secret communication network. Each brought unique skills: encryption, observation, code memorization, or artistic talent that could hide information in plain sight. Every contribution was vital. Guards attempted increasingly harsh punishments. Interrogations became routine, but prisoners anticipated these moves. They hid messages cleverly, relying on logic, observation, and stealth. The more the captors tightened control, the more sophisticated the codes became. By mid-1944, intelligence gathered by POWs had directly influenced multiple Allied operations. Small victories in prison camps had ripples on battlefields thousands of miles away. Information once thought lost was now changing the course of the war. One daring prisoner used a series of laundry signals combined with coded drawings to transmit a complete supply schedule. Allied forces intercepted it, allowing them to plan a raid that saved hundreds of soldiers. The camp became a miniature headquarters of intelligence, invisible to the enemy. Camaraderie deepened as men shared methods, taught newcomers, and celebrated successes quietly. Humor and cleverness became survival tools. Each successful message was a victory, each failure a lesson. Together, they transformed isolation into a network of resistance. Prisoners developed new systems constantly, anticipating guard suspicions. Books, letters, furniture, meals, and even chore schedules were all adapted as coded signals. Every mundane activity became an opportunity to communicate, plan, and resist. The psychological impact on captors was significant. Officers noticed that, despite strict control, prisoners seemed to anticipate movements, resist attempts at breaking morale, and sometimes even escape unexpectedly. They didn't know about the hidden codes, only that the prisoners were cleverer than expected. By late 1944, POW networks were highly sophisticated. Multi-camp coordination allowed intelligence to move across regions without detection. What had begun in isolated barracks had evolved into a continental-scale web of covert communication. Prisoners had learned to adapt, improvise, and innovate constantly. The stakes were always life or death, yet their determination never wavered. Intelligence flowed invisibly, silently shaping events, giving hope to those behind the wire and aiding efforts far beyond the camp. Stories emerged of POWs guiding escapees to freedom, delivering intelligence to waiting forces, and saving lives through careful observation and coded transmissions. Each success became legend within the camp, inspiring others to join, teach, and innovate. Some prisoners even used humor and deception as part of their system. Guards believed they were fooling prisoners when, in fact, prisoners were turning those very manipulations into coded opportunities. Every act of oversight by captors became a chance for clever retaliation. By the winter of 1944, the invisible war of codes had reached its peak. Every camp, every prisoner, and every coded message contributed to a larger Allied intelligence effort. The prisoners had turned captivity into influence, fear into ingenuity, and oppression into strategic advantage. In the darkest days of confinement, POWs had discovered that freedom could exist in the mind. And that mind, clever, resilient, and relentless, could fight a war invisible to the enemy, proving that courage and ingenuity cannot be imprisoned. The legacy of POW codes was more than survival. It was a testament to human spirit, intellect, and resistance. Even behind barbed wire, prisoners had found a way to shape history, one coded message at a time.